All right, so to talk about that subject matter at hand, of course, people are saying that a lot of people are leaving Street Fighter 6 to play Street Fighter 5 because they feel like it's getting boring and repetitive. Here's the thing: the game's been out for almost a year and a half. Like, what is it? It's on its second year, halfway through right now, right? Yeah. So it's like on year 2, and on its second season, little over a year and stuff like that. It would make sense for people to feel like the game's getting repetitive because the game has been played exhaustingly, like an exhausting amount. Like, I put over like 1,000 hours into the game, and I enjoyed the hell out of it. That said, the game does have a certain flow to it that is a little bit too predictable. And what I mean specifically is that the game has this really specific kind of flow. I wouldn't say flow chart's not the right word, but there's a rhythm to the game that really kind of keeps happening over and over again. Here, like, let me explain it. Here's a great way to explain it. So typically you have a neutral fight, right? You fight from neutral, so we'll call that neutral right there. You fight from neutral where you're using footsies and your typical spacing shenanigans. But what ends up happening in neutral is that you eventually go into a knockdown state. A knockdown. We'll call it down. D for down. You hit to a knockdown state. The moment that you get your first knockdown, whether that be like a sweep, a throw, or a combo, you know, that knocks them down, you usually want to pick a combo that puts you in Oki in the game. And Oki is a situation where the opponent has to guess between strike and throw. So it's a 50-50 guess. This is the most optimal way to play the game. So in Oki, when you get knocked down, you get Oki. Here, I gotta widen this thing up a little bit more. So let's try. So you get a knockdown. Then you get like an Oki situation from that. So knockdowns cause an Oki, which creates this like branching tree paths of like 2 ways usually. Either throw or strike. I know I forgot the R, but it's fine. Or strike. Now, throw by itself is not that threatening because it only does like, you know, a set damage. But the thing about throws in Street Fighter 6 is that they cause a throw loop. So meaning that if you set them up in the right situation, you're gonna have to keep taking throws over and over again. So it's incentivized to take the throws because a strike can lead to an enormous amount of damage in the game. So this leads to like a constant flow in the game where it's basically a neutral fight into an Oki situation into a 50-50 guess. And more often than not, you're going to take throw damage consistently in the game. This is what leads to a situation where when you get cornered against the wall, this happens all the time and it gets really predictable. My problem with the game in Street Fighter 6 is that damage in the game is way too high for this kind of situation. Now, it's not to say this happens all the time. This is the only way that the game plays. It's just that this is the most common repetitive element of the game that keeps happening over and over and over again. And so what ends up happening is that if you take strike, you lose like, you know, 50% to like 60% of your health. While throw, you lose like what, like I think like we'll say like 7% of your health. Because it's a 50-50, you're more incentivized to keep taking throws over and over again as opposed to taking strikes. So a lot of times what you'll end up seeing is people just constantly taking throws over and over and over and over again, and that leads to a situation where you kind of see the same pattern over and over again, and eventually you are going to eventually take a strike in response. So that creates a really predictable gameplay flow, and it makes it very annoying to deal with, and it creates a lot of stress in the game, which is what's leading the game to feeling boring, because you're watching the same, like, I wouldn't say meta, but like same rhythm play out all the time. Personally, I don't have an issue with a natural 50-50 mechanic like an Oki in fighting games. It's perfectly fine to have them. But in a game like Street Fighter 6, where it's so easy to output damage so quickly, especially on the third round, like round 1 and round 2 of Street Fighter 6 is the best rounds. That's when the game's at its most fun, because resources are so low at that point where the guessing game is there. But the moment that you get to round 3, most characters usually have three super meters and a fully stacked, like a full drive gauge. Because of that, during the third round, because you're in that situation with the third round, you end up finding yourself in a position where it's literally round 1. It's a back and forth neutral game where you're getting the feel for each other. Round 2, you get a little bit more ambitious. You kind of figure some things out. You may sweep the opponent in some cases, but more often than not, that isn't going to happen. But round 3, it's usually comes down to 2 reads, and that's it. That sweeps the game, because you get into a situation where you're fighting neutral. You Oki your opponent after you hit them, like let's say you hit them with a 3-hit combo, like standing medium punch, crouching medium punch into, medium tatsu. It carries them far enough where they're near the wall, and you put them in an Oki situation. Now they're in an Oki situation, they have to guess between throw and strike. So more often than not, they're gonna take throw. But if they take the throw, then you just keep repeating the throw loop until you catch them not taking the throws. But you may get lucky in that one case where you happen to land a strike, and in doing so, you can just delete 60 to 70% of the health because you have full drive gauge, full set of meter, and that it's the last round of the game. And this happens so frequently in the game. It's not to say that it's the only thing that happens, but it's so common that it leads to repetitiveness in the game. So that's where that feeling is coming from that everyone's talking about. Now, people saying that they're going back to Street Fighter V, why is that the case? That is mostly because the case that Street Fighter V has had many years to develop its gameplay flow, so they fixed a lot of those common issues. Oki pressure is still very predominant in Street Fighter V. It happens all the time, but its damage output in that game isn't nearly as high as it is in Street Fighter 6, where it's literally 2 reads and you're fucking donezo. Even with the stun gauge, like, you can usually kind of like push yourself back, or push the opponent back before you get into stun, or at least like play carefully enough to prevent yourself from getting into too much stun. That said, it doesn't mean that like snowball effects don't happen in Street Fighter V the same way they do in Street Fighter 6. They do. It's just it's not as frequent as it is in Street Fighter 6 due to the drive system, specifically drive rush, because of the fact that drive rush enables an immediate 50-50 game. It's so easy with the drive rush where you put yourself in an Oki situation where you do a meaty strike, which gives you frame advantage, and then you throw another strike, and then you drive rush, and then the opponent has to guess, are you going to throw me or are you going to strike me? More often than not, you're going to strike because that's the higher risk. Or more often than not, they're going to throw because taking a strike is higher risk, which can lead to so much more damage. So that's usually what ends up happening. But it just leads to a very predictable gameplay flow because of that, and it makes the game feel very like annoying. And so Street Fighter V was able to fill out a lot more mechanics to reduce that kind of stress. I expect by next year they're going to do some system mechanic changes in Street Fighter 6. If they don't, that's a huge mistake. but they should be adding some system mechanic changes in the next season of season 3 that will radically change the game and expand on it. This is very common for year 1 and year 2 of fighting games, where the game doesn't change dramatically much at all. Guilty Gear Strive did this. Guilty Gear XR did this, where the first 2 years of the game effectively is the same fucking game. What was another game? King of Fighters 15, same thing. Until recently, they've only been adding some new mechanics into the game that radically shift the gameplay flow a little bit, like that new Shatter Strike move, I forgot what they call it, and stuff like that, where you have a defensive mechanic against too much oppression and stuff like that. Street Fighter 4 had its super variations and then its ultra variation, which added a lot of new mechanics to help reduce these things. Granted, it came with its own slight of issues, but that is the common lifespan of a game. So during the first 2 years, it's very common for a lot of fighting games to look back on previous fighting games, or fighting game players to look back at previous fighting games with fondness during its final release. That same thing happened with Street Fighter V, with Street Fighter 4. Where a lot of people look back at Street Fighter 4 with such fondness because Street Fighter 4 had such a fleshed out system by the end of its lifetime, where Street Fighter 5 had a very bare bones system by the time it was released. So in my mind, Street Fighter 6 is doing a great job still, despite the fact that it is a little predictable, but it's expected for people to feel a little burned out with the game. My best advice for people, like, this is the reason why I'm playing Infinite right now. I've put over 1,000 hours into Street Fighter 6. I need a break from the game. As much as I still like tap into the game and play it on my own time and enjoy the game for what it is, the game does fucking annoy me because of the fact that it is the same rhythm that you keep finding yourself in over and over and over again. So for me, it just comes down to the factor that I would prefer a game to have a different, like, some new mechanics to kind of shake up the gameplay flow a little bit, and that takes time for the developers to come up with solutions like that. So I expect during season 3 that they'll come up with a solution by then, but it's very common. That'll be the same thing with Tekken too. During its second year, they're already announcing a bunch of changes to, like, moves and stuff like that, but I would expect during year 3 of Tekken they would add some new mechanics. People don't realize that there was a time with fighting games where updates for fighting games were, and I'm not talking like that long ago, like it was not that long ago that many fighting games don't get updates, like system change updates for their fighting games online. Like, even when they were online and getting like modern day support, it wasn't that long ago that these games did not get like update support that changed the game radically. You get balance changes, sure, but system changes, that rarely happen. Nowadays, that's to be expected. But it is something that, you know, is to be expected, where players are going to go back to the old games and look at it with fondness, and I think it's a good thing ultimately in the end. I think it's a great thing that people are looking back at Street Fighter V with rose-tinted glasses, because the game is getting more credit for what it achieved by the end of its lifetime. I think that Street Fighter V was a great game. I had a lot of fun playing it during the end of its lifespan. I just didn't like it during its first 2 years because of the way that it handled its shenanigans. But yeah, I'm not surprised.